Hello world, Patricia, O'Connor, and Frida Reba Darcy here today on the Bonsai balcony. It is a beautiful, very warm, blue sky Sunday. Kind of interesting skies, wouldn't you say? But it's really pretty out. That sun is bright. It's really pretty out. It's really warm out. Yesterday was cool, was chilly. Today is quite a bit warmer. I am really enjoying this. We have the door, well, the door's been open for a couple of days, but today it's nicer to have the door open than it was yesterday. And we're going to do a little bit about some of the questions that I've been getting lately. I think I am going to take those questions and those answers and spread them around because they were timely. Yeah, in the last couple of days, I've gotten some interesting feedback from you guys, and I just thought this would be a good time to do that. One of them, three in particular that I had, and they will lead to their own little wanderings as they and I tend to do. Question one was from one of our viewers. And they were asking me about the time frame for propagating seedlings, propagating for popping seeds. I like to call it popping seeds. And they stated that they had been stratifying some paper bark pine seeds for a certain amount of time, and was just curious about what my time frame was for propagating seeds. So here's a really quick rundown on that, on the whole thing. When you see me watering these trays, for those of you who weren't in on it, when you see me watering these trays, those are trays that I get because I work at a hardware store that has a greenhouse that has plants in it, and every so often those turn up in our garbage and I'll harvest them. You could also get those on... just go online and you could get those cheap. It's just little seed trays for little pots. Now, what are they filled with? They are filled, in this case, with perlite. And as I've been discovering, the roots coming out of perlite look really, really good. It does quite a bit like what we want our akadama to do, and that is the roots. The roots of the trees find the little crevices, and they fill those little crevices with a microscopic little root that then swells up in that crevice and breaks it, and that's how they break down the substrate. But the substrate also holds water, which is the reason why they do that, and that's how we get fine roots on things. So that wasn't the reason I went with perlite, but that was just a discovery upon repotting some of these guys. So I start off with one of those trays full of those little free pots, and those could have also been cardboard trays that you would get from the coffee shop when you buy 4 coffees, and then those cups could have been 4 coffee cups with even with the little plastic dome lids and everything, would be perfect for, or really well suited probably to propagation. Anyway, I digress. How you get into this. I got into this for no money. There are other ways to get in this for no money besides dumpster diving. Having done that, they're full of perlite. I take the amount of seeds that I'm going to use. Now, their question was over something, and they were told to grow these like they would grow white pines. So I don't have access to white pines here, single flush short needle high elevation tree. It's too warm for those for us, but so that's why you would need to stratify that, because they are born and evolved in an area that does get colder. So I could see why that was necessary. For my Japanese black pines, I've never had to do that. I buy my seeds. I would go to the online auction on Facebook and buy them for a Ziploc baggie with the bottom of the Ziploc baggie full of seeds, and that's a couple of hundred seeds for about $15 plus about $3 or something in shipping. It would just show up as a little bill on my PayPal account which I would ping, and then they would show up amazingly fast, and I still probably have a third of them. The first year I popped them, I did 3 rounds, and 2 of those 3 rounds I got 100% germination rate. How I did that was I would take the amount of seed, I would take the amount of pots that I had intended to grow, and I would fill them full of substrate, put them in that tray, have those guys ready. I would then count that many seeds off to the side and then dump those in a mason jar with water that I'd let soak for a little while so that any chlorine or something would leave or vape off as much as possible. And then I would dunk those seeds in there, and you can do this and plant them at 24 hours. What I would typically do is thump them at 12 hours, any that are still floating. And I was told from years ago, and I was told when I read about pine tree propagation, to do this same thing. Those that float have a low rate of germination, and those that sink are viable. That's what I think you will see that with a lot of seeds. If you read about how to grow them, they will tell you that one little thing. I bring that up because on one of them, at 48 hours, which is how long, so at 12 hours, I thump them all to see if any of them will sink, and some of them do. Some of them just had a little air trapped underneath their little wooden shells, enough to keep them buoyant after they were supposed to sink. So a little dab, and they don't come back up. They sink down there to the bottom with the rest of them. And some of them just came right back up like corks. So I planted all anyway and got 100%. So in that case, the story about those that float may not be viable was not accurate, I was happy to say. And those are those. We've already gotten these. Those are some of the trees that we already have going out. So I would basically take a chopstick and go to every one of those and poke a little chopstick size hole in the substrate, about that far down. Just go right down the thing. And then after 48 hours, I would take a piece of cloth and put over the lid of the jar so as not to lose any of the seeds, and then turn it upside down, and then let all that water run out, and then lift the jar off the towel where we have all of those seeds in the middle. And then I would take some tweezers and go down and plant every seed in those little tubular shaped holes that I made in the perlite with my chopstick. Now I have, like I said, I've had a couple of times where I had 100%. I've had a couple of times where 4 didn't grow. I've also had a couple of times where I caught myself planting things that weren't actually seeds. Pine tree seeds are maybe a third smaller than a peppercorn, and it's really kind of hard to see. So if you're looking at a seed or a bunch of seeds and you've got a little chunk of bark or something in there that's about the right size, you may very well germinate and plant that and not knowing. So, and then I've also been clumsy. I've had more than one seed. I've had more than one seed come up in a pot before. Like those 2 guys are hanging out together because that's the way it's always been for those. And I do have one or two of those in there, or playing doubles where I got clumsy. But within 4 days, usually I will see one of those trees popping up, and then by the end of that same day, usually some more, and then in the next couple of days, more and more, and that kind of turns itself up until usually by the end of the week, what's going to pop is popped. I usually give it another week if there's some pots that haven't had any sprouts come up yet. I usually make sure that I haven't, that they haven't gotten skipped or something, and And then because this is the Bay Area and we get and have very temperate temperatures, I will then take the tray of trees, having given it X amount of time, like 2 weeks, right? By 2 weeks, they should all be popped. And then I'll take it out here. I'll take it out here and put it on the rail unless it's cold and windy. If it's cold and windy, I'll put it up here and shelter it out of the wind for a few days, and then they'll go out there. If I live someplace where it was cold, like where they still have winter, because right now it's January, and I would start those under fluorescent light in my kitchen. I have a 4-foot fluorescent light in my kitchen, and it's a 2-bank, which means it has 2 LED light bulbs, 4-foot light bulbs in it, and you can run the bulbs independently, and I only run half the bank. Truth be known, if I were to leave them under that light for a longer period of time, they would probably start stretching underneath there, which is not good. You know, they kind of start spiraling and stretching and stuff, although that would probably make for some cool looking trees later. I digress. Anyway, I pop them in my kitchen under a fluorescent light using one side, and because I live in a very temperate climate, they immediately, within 2 weeks of that, go right outside. They come right out here on the balcony. In times where I lived in places where we could have freezes and where freezes were more likely during winter, I would keep perennials and stuff inside and just let them get big until Easter and then bring them out. So that's just something to think about. Pines are hardier than most of the perennials that I used to try to protect by keeping them in until Easter. So that's not something I would necessarily worry about on a black pine. And other species that are mid elevation, like from the hills, like red pines, they're going to be cold hardy. And then the high elevation pines are going to be cold hardy. So that's probably the same advice would hold true. Having said that, I have not, because I can't have white pines, I have not popped any of those. But I've had tons of experience popping other things, and among those other things were black pines. We did have a question about harvesting a red pine. So that would probably be a Yamadori hill collected. And the question was also, I think, timely in that this would be, in the United States, for instance, this would be the time to do that. This would be a good time to do that. It's winter, and everything's not pushing out new growth all over it and is alive and active, although it's not too far off. So it's the right combination of trees are dormant but soon to awaken. So you won't have a long time to wait to see whether or not they push out new growth in spring. I think that's kind of the sweet spot to Yamadori collecting. Yamadori. And this would have been a little bit like that red pines because this is the ponderosa, which means it's a higher elevation. But the red pine that they were talking about collecting would be a multi-flush pine. This ponderosa is a higher elevation single flush pine. So the answer to that is yes, go after that red pine. Make sure that you have legal access to the land and or permits. Well, you have permits. It's going to say you have legal access to it, or assures you have permission from the owner. If it's a park or state land or government land, make sure you have permits. There are ways to get permits that will allow you to come out and collect more trees, and you're going to want to feel like digging up in a day. So, and if you're going to do that, my recommendation would be to have a box already in place, so that you go from the ground to the container. And I probably would not, I definitely would not recommend going, this is another Yamadori, I wouldn't recommend going from the ground to a bonsai container. I would recommend going from the ground to a large container that would give the roots plenty of time to recover and rejuvenate. And I would also get as much of the root ball as you possibly can. Remember that pine trees store all of their energy in their roots. So like get all of those, bag as soon as you get the tree out of the ground, bag the root ball so that you are retaining as much as the original soil as possible. Plan on, in a perfect world, to remove the original soil from the root ball after 2 repottings. So that is to say that when you put it in the box that you've made, or your container or whatever, it should have quite a bit of the original soil still around the root ball. We want as much of that original stuff as possible going in this time around. So once you've done that and you have it in a container, if you have a greenhouse, put it in a greenhouse. If you don't have it in a greenhouse, maybe take it out of direct light for a couple of weeks, and then reintroduce it to the harsh realities of all of the real world on the by and by. Give it a couple of weeks in shade, or a greenhouse. Don't let it cook. Don't let it freeze. And don't let it cook. Don't let it freeze. So that's kind of my general Yamadori. Get all the roots that you possibly can. Now, also, you want to make sure that this is a species just maybe so it's a red pine. That means that you're probably going up to harvest this. You're going up to harvest this in the hills. That might not be the same climate you live in. I would also make sure that you're ready to take care of the tree in the way in which it is used to being treated. In other words, this ponderosa may grow in an environment that is, we can name off like 4 or 5 things, but that doesn't mean it has to have all those. That just means that out of all those things, it can survive those issues better than other trees, so it tends to hang out there. That tends to be south-facing cliffs, arid, dry, really cold, and really hot. On the other hand, if you water and feed it, the tree will love you. And it doesn't have to be a south-facing cliff. It just needs to be able to get direct sunlight. So that's kind of a give and take there. But given that into consideration, remember that you're putting this tree in a container now, and just because it could go all season on almost no water, all bets are off now. It may have had other tricks up its sleeve to keep itself alive during drought that it no longer has because it's in a container. And we're gonna wanna account for that. Let's see. That's got that on the. I think that's probably enough tips from me on collecting Yamadori. I used to do a lot of that as a kid when I grew up in Southeast Texas. There were a lot of pines, loblollies, and Scots. I didn't know what I know now about long-needled pines, so I wasn't that enthusiastic with them. I didn't think they made believable specimens, and I couldn't see the big picture as a 12-year-old. I do now. I wish I lived someplace where I could go back in my backyard and dig up pine trees. But it definitely is a thing. It definitely is a thing to do that at the right time of year. And they always used to tell me, too, that you didn't want to kill the taproot, which is folklore. You have to kill the taproot in order to put it in a bonsai container. I have heard people say that they will go through and cut the taproot off of a tree before they collect it, like a year before they collect it, which I thought was interesting. So then they would come back out. The tree had already responded to that, however it was going to respond, and then they would collect the tree in that shape. So that's just other little things to consider. I can't say enough. You want to get as much of the roots as you possibly can. You want to try to make sure as much of that root ball stays intact if possible. Would bag those roots upon collection, like bag them as in a plastic bag, maybe put that in a canvas bag so it doesn't tear open and you lose everything there. And then get back to whatever base camp is or home already have your box ready for your tree to go in, and give it a long time, a year or so, a long time. Give it the proper amount of time for the tree to recover in that before you move on to the next process. Never go from collected to a bonsai pot. At least go to an oversized bonsai training pot, which this one, for instance, didn't. It went from a box to here, and this is an oversized training pot. So that's kind of the notes on that. Then I had a question. A question about a Japanese juniper, and the question was, can you graft on a Japanese juniper that has had all of its foliage removed? One, I was very quick to say that my experience with junipers as bonsai is none. Limited would be an overstatement. None. I've had a lemon cypress, which is basically one, and it was showed up in the back seat of my car during my lift job after one Christmas party when everybody got brought home from an office party. There was a lemon cypress rolling around on the back floorboard of the car that I kept for a year, and it didn't do well here, or it didn't do well for me. But my experience with junipers is living in California. I'm surrounded by them. There are quite a few varieties of juniper that bear local names. There's quite a few species that have names of California counties in their species name because that's where they are from. So, my experience with junipers is basically based on listening to lectures that involve junipers and the questions and answers that came up. I know opposite that they're different from pines and that they carry their foliage, that they carry their energy in their foliage. And this is important. The question was, can you graft a juniper that has had all the leaves taken off of it, and the word was removed? So my short answer was, junipers can be grafted. Yes, junipers can be grafted. Stated 2 cases where people had done extensive grafting to junipers. I know of a case where somebody went to repot a juniper that they had just recently purchased, and upon repotting it, noticed that all the roots on this tree had died. Remember what I said about it carrying its strength in its foliage? So it was living off of the borrowed time that was banked up in that foliage. The bonsai grower then did an air layer on the trunk, and that air layer was successful, and that produced the roots that the tree would then live off of. But he was definitely at a race against time. Just yesterday I watched a lecture on bonsai morai, and it was a few years old. It is in public domain, so you could go back and find it on YouTube. And Randy Knight was the lecturer, and he basically started off with one thing we never do to a juniper this time of year, and he was speaking in winter. Everybody was, and the answer was, you never cut back the foliage of a juniper this time of year. Was what he was like we all know this, and I don't know whether or not that's a hard and fast as far as everybody knows, or whether that was a Randy Knight thing. But the reason being is, unlike pine trees, they carry all of their energy in that foliage, and if you're cutting it all off, you will weaken them. So why was the foliage removed? And when you said all, did you mean all? That could be fatal. So it's not up to me to say that's fatal, because I don't have a balcony full of junipers to bank that on So But if it was removed as an aesthetic choice, then that's one thing. If you noticed that the color was a little off, see, I'm thinking about this a little. I'm trying to read between the lines here, I suppose. But I'm going, this is the amount of time that if somebody would have gotten a juniper, say, for the holidays, they got it as a gift. This is about the amount of time that they might notice that the color had changed if the juniper were not in a good way. And if you notice that the color has changed on a juniper and you go up and it feels dry, it may already be gone. That's another thing that I've seen about junipers, having watched people go through their juniper trials and tribulations. When a pine tree dies, it tends to turn some nasty color, or actually they're pretty colors when they die. But you see that and it's pretty, this is the color of a dead pine tree, this is that color, and you know it when you see it. When something just kind of fades a little, you don't always see that. And when you go up and it's crispy, it's dead. And I've seen people go, what do I do for this juniper? Now it seems to the color doesn't seem to be good. And they go, well, the truth is it's already left the building. So that's kind of what I've heard about junipers, which made me wonder why the foliage had been removed. If it were removed for that reason, then this might not be viable to begin with. If for aesthetic reasons it had just been mostly removed, so you just said I cut it all off when really there's a few sprigs somewhere, okay, fine. I have seen people do extensive approach grafts to junipers. You can easily clip, this is my oak, not a juniper, but I've seen people clip the shoots off of their juniper and then put those in substrate and propagate them. Apparently they propagate easily. They could then go back and graft those shoots anywhere on the living vein of the juniper that they wanted, or they could grow those into long whips and then channel out a place in the trunk and just lay that whip in there, and then a couple of years later they would have added. Now that's a way for somebody who is doing, taking a piece of driftwood and stapling a tree to it to get a convincing, a fairly convincing looking deadwood feature. But at the same time, if you had a one seed juniper and it had been maybe suffering dieback or something, that would be a way to keep your one seed tree vital. You could just like take a cutting, plant the cutting, turn the cutting into a whip, put the pot right here, take your little router, route out a little whip width channel there, and then lay that whip in there. And in a couple of years, when that expands and the wraparound on this tree starts to meet it halfway, you would have a stripe living vein inside of on either side of a dead wood feature, but that would still be the same genetics because it's all the same tree. So that's a little of what I knew about grafting and junipers, that they take the cuttings easily. They can be grafted, both air layered and grafted, and people will also take junipers that are in the mountains that have beautiful age but maybe not as complementary foliage, and they will graft a pedigree form of foliage onto them. So I know that all of those processes and all of those things are on the table when it comes to junipers. I am concerned about somebody asking me this time of year if they can graft a juniper that's had all of its foliage removed. I hope by all of its foliage removed, that means there's still some. Let's see, that was the question about seeds. That was the question about Japanese black pine collecting, and that was the question about, and that was our question about grafting of junipers. Only other thing is this. When it comes to my bald cypress trees, this was an observation I've been making the last couple of days, and I'm going to free associate here and let you guys know kind of where my head is. So, okay, I've got this framed up. You know what? That's pretty cool looking. As lattice and as nature and as pattern, that's pretty cool looking. I don't know how natural that is. I've discussed this before. These trees tend to make these, except ridiculously long. And then it'll make more around it, and then in a couple of years it'll snap this one off, and one of these around it will get light it wasn't getting before and replace it. Why am I mentioning this? Because with the ramification that I find pretty easy, we could look at this and go, how many years is this? That would have been 1 year. This could have been 2 years. And then this could have been 3 years, but probably not. Year one, I went, wow, that thing's getting long, and cut it. And by the end of that same summer, before they shut off, I probably was up to here. And then cutting that off gave us all the rest of that. So I can do this really quickly. Also, I was noticing in yesterday's video, in this shot, in this mode, and this is our parting shot at 31 minutes. We're about to wrap this up. We have 4 or 5 years of enjoyment in bringing these trees forward to finish bonsai. They still have a little bit of time to go. And in that time, none of these guys that I'm ramifying, none of them will be here, likely. I mean, I could hand this tree over to somebody for reasons I can't see, and then but barring that. And the reason is, this one, for instance, this limb is bigger than the trunk that it's attached to, and it's bigger than the leader. It's time for this to go already. Year 2, it's time for that one to go already. This other stuff will be too fat. And I'd already mentioned that I was wondering what would be the longevity of these branches. And just to do them in long whips and let them get replaced with other long whips as I begin to see these guys, the next long whip, become too old, or not too old, but too fat. So I'll start letting some of these around it, get out there and then cut it off, and then they get more light because it's gone, and then they take out, and then we select one and go. That's probably what's going to happen here. I don't see this tree ever, could be wrong, but I'm questioning whether or not I'm going to be able to do permanent branches and have them be a part of the system for a really prolonged amount of time. I think at some point it's prolific, it grows fast. It grows, in a lot of ways, it grows like a tropical. It would grow even faster if it were in a hotter environment. But it's in the bay, y'all, which is pretty cool. So that works out for us. But in the long run, 2 years, if that, a year or two invested in this, and it's too big. It's too big for its placement. And that's probably going to hold true for even the coolest one of these. So in the end, I would like whatever structure will hold the longest. If long branches, giving us our diamond shapes, is the way to go, only to replace them when they get too fat with some of the skinnier ones that want to come up all around it every spring. If that's the way to go, or cutting them back and ramifying them off gives us a couple extra years of them before they look too fat. I still have to take into consideration that they take a couple of extra years to make. So, yeah, and this isn't a dilemma, as in, this isn't hurting us. This is just stuff that, as somebody who's learning as we go and has done a pretty good job of avoiding some hideous mistakes. I haven't done anything to kill these trees. I haven't done anything to leave some hideous scars on them that we can't overcome. I think our training has been timely enough So yeah, and I have seen people leave these unvibricated, just be long branches, and that looks natural, and you can get any shape you want out of them that way. Or you can vibricate them off, and when they're full of leaves, you don't really see that vibrication until come winter anyway, and then you do have something cool to look at. But I don't know that you get to keep them long enough to necessarily make that worthwhile. And in the time between now and we pull up to a bonsai pot repot and pull up into some sort of show-shaped foliage, I think all this stuff will be gone and will be replaced by newer stuff. Like and subscribe if you guys have not already. Come Wednesday, we'll do a Wednesday drop. I love the questions. I'll probably go back and add a link or two on this where I'll give some of the sources for my information. I think that'd be a good idea, especially like when I say I've never had a juniper bonsai, but here's what I think, blah blah blah. That would be a good time to say why I think that. I think that based on, and then I can show you my source would be good. Unless just saying that jinxes it for me on the old YouTube and I can't ever find it. That's not things that's actually stuff that I've seen recently. So, A, that's why it was fresh on the memory, and two, I should be able to go back and find that stuff. I appreciate you. Frida appreciates you. And thank you all so much for watching.